this edition of Going Deep with me, Richard Mills, and we welcome Mark Lwin, who's been a long-term contributor to the nation's business process outsourcing and shared services sector. Certainly has helped from the very early days develop Philippines into a real world-class performer. So glad to have him with us and glad to have you too for Going Deep with me, Richard Mills, and we'll have a wonderful session. Glad to have you with us. We're Going Deep with me, Richard Mills, and our special guest is Mark Lwin for this edition. So welcome, Mark. Really glad to see you and be here for this session with you.
Thanks, Richard. Always great to be with you as well. Sorry it's virtual like the rest of our reality these days, but yeah, looking forward to spending some time with you tonight.
Absolutely, Mark. Well, Mark, you've made a lot of contributions, certainly to Philippines, but you've had kind of an interesting story. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up in Philippines of all places?
Sure. Well, yeah, I guess we'll start from maybe the earlier days.
Sure.
My first conversation about coming to the Philippines was 2003 when I received a phone call from AIG, which eventually I ended up spending the last 16 and a half years with AIG. But that was the early days. And it was kind of ironic, actually, because AIG is a global financial services insurance company then and now has operations in 150 or so countries around the world. But 17 years ago, as AIG was looking at setting up their first truly global shared services company here in the Philippines, they were looking for a head of quality. They were looking for someone with a specific Six Sigma background. I had some experience from GE Capital in that area. And so they reached out to me, but they were looking for someone outside the company because they couldn't find anybody inside of the company at that point who was interested or willing to come to the Philippines. And I say that's an ironic story because if you flash forward just a couple of years later, we had a line out the door of people inside of AIG who were dying to come to the Philippines and participate in the growth of the operations and shared services industry here, and it became really a destination of choice for a lot of our people once they saw the growth and the dynamism of the marketplace here, especially in that was the heyday of the BPO industry as well. Very interesting that the reason that AIG reached out to me was because they couldn't find somebody in this massive and global company with tons of talent and global roots. And as I was talking with the recruiter later on, I said, well, how did you find me? At that point, I was in a relatively smaller city in the U.S. in Birmingham, Alabama, with a smaller company. And they said, well, we're looking for somebody who, with this sort of background, but also an operational background, but also somebody who would be interested in being mobile into Asia. So they Googled, or maybe it was a monster search, Six Sigma and military background. And this is a company at that point didn't have much experience recruiting from the U.S. military. But they thought, okay, that would maybe find the mobility factor and the Six Sigma background was they're looking for. And so my name came up, and I think I was on a monster database at that point. But yeah, so probably one of the few, or maybe the only monster searches I'm aware of that originated ended up as a global position in an overseas assignment. But yeah, all because at that point, the understanding of the Philippines environment and the marketplace here was just too new at that point.
Interesting. So the military background, that's an interesting one that they searched upon, Mark. Mark, maybe we can just start with just explaining your current role here now and a bit about your organization, because I know you've done different things in the region and in Philippines.
Sure. It's apart from all the other COVID craziness that's been going on around the world of this last year, it's been a little bit unusual year for me as well. As I mentioned, I spent 16 and a half years with AIG. Company I loved, certainly people. Yes. Absolutely loved, an amazing organization with just amazing people. But over the last year, I started a conversation with Reed Elsevier Philippines, which is the servicing arm of Relics globally, which led to basically me joining them in September of last year in the middle of the pandemic. So I'm now the managing director for Reed Elsevier Philippines, where we provide services to the Relics group of companies. Relics is a global provider of information and analytics, and particularly to professional and business segments, such as the legal industry, researchers, clinical research, academia. Basically, we take content and enhance that content to provide insights and analytics and intelligence from that content. So it's a pretty exciting company, and a company itself that's been in transition over the last 10 years from a more traditional print and media company to digitizing all that content. But the real excitement of the story really has come as the content's been digitized. Then the real value of what we provide, is the analytics and the intelligence from enhancing that data and providing it back to our customers in a much more proactive way, rather than waiting for somebody to search for some of the content we have in our databases. Us providing in a much more active way insights through the workflow of a lawyer, for example, or a researcher through our different online and digitized products. So that's kind of in a nutshell part of the excitement of joining this organization and why I made the decision to move from an organization that I've been with for over 16 years to a new organization. But both great organizations. But it was the story of change and being part of this change and trying to craft a strategy for the future as we look at the next 10 years ahead, which was really the key reason that I made the move.
Sure. And some of the big brands that people might have heard of, Lexus Nexus is one. Anyone who's a lawyer, doctor, or researcher would have heard. But what are the other brands? Lexus Nexus is a big one that I know, Mark.
Sure. Yeah. So Relics makes us 4 key business units. Lexus Nexus is our legal and professional business unit. So our flagship product or brand is Lexus Nexus. Although we have a variety of other legal tech companies and brands that we've either acquired or built or are now integrated into our Lexus Nexus suite of products. So if you're a lawyer or an attorney, just about anywhere in the world, you would probably be very familiar with Lexus Nexus. Our other business units, we have Elsevier, which is a company dating back to the 1800s, which is also more traditionally was a content and media company, and it specializes in healthcare, medical, science, and academia. So if you're a researcher or an academic or in the healthcare space, most of your publications and journals you would go to are published by Elsevier. And then we also have Reed Exhibitions, which is a global exhibitions company. Apart from many trade shows around the world, we are also known for the Cannes Film Festival as well as Comic-Con. So there's trade applications to what Reed Exhibitions does, as well as some more maybe pop culture aspects as well. And then the 4th business unit is called Risk Solutions Group, which has, again, a variety of brands, but everything from agribusiness to aviation to insurance, where, again, the key theme is using enhanced content and analytics to help our customers better understand and mitigate risks, whether it's fraud, cybersecurity, changing weather patterns in the agribusiness, or other aspects for the different industries that we service there.
I see. Good. And so it's been a successful career, Mark. And I remember meeting you many years ago when you were new to Philippines. You were a real mover shaker then, of course, but you had AIG is a big organization, a big global outfit. I went through a bit of a challenge during the financial crisis, but you seem to have not just weathered the storm, but did very well with that organization. They were certainly a very early operator in the higher value shared services like Reed Elsevier, where you are now. But how did you do so well all through that organization? And why do you think you eventually became to head that operation, both here and in Malaysia? Maybe you could talk a bit about that.
Yeah, sure, Richard. Well, I mean, a lot of it was being right time, right place, and being willing to move and go and do things that maybe, like, as I mentioned in 2003, at that point, many others, weren't willing to do, or it was too unknown for some people to jump into that space. And that's probably one maybe theme for my career. But yeah, but my time here with AIG, which certainly was a blessing, but also some pretty some interesting times as well. I started off here in the Philippines as part of the original management team as we're building a global shared services organization. Eventually led the organization here in the Philippines, expanded that into Malaysia, and that was kind of the first half of my AIG experience, more on the operational side, which in many ways reflected my operational background from my previous companies, as well as the military before. And then in 2013, came back to the Philippines, but at that point came back as the insurance GM. So moved to a P&L role representing our insurance company. And that was, again, pretty unique in terms of career pathing, both I think within AIG, as well as what I had expected as part of AIG. In fact, kind of interesting anecdote here. At that time period when the previous GM was retiring and we were looking for a replacement, I remember applying for this job internally, and the head of the region at that point, a gentleman I knew pretty well, knew me from my operational background and a lot of things I'd done in operations within AIG. But he took me out to lunch and said, "Hey, mate, you're a great operational leader, but you're not an insurance GM. You're not an underwriter. You don't have this particular pedigree or this particular background. So I just wanted to take you out to lunch and let you know that, let you down easy, so to speak," which I appreciated, because he was trying to look out for my career and what he thought was best interest for the organization as well. But through this discussion, I said, "Look, you know me from a certain background and from 6 years or at that point 4 or 5 years of experience with me. Let me give it, put me through the interview process. Let me have a chance to explain to you, the competencies I bring to the table here, and how this operational background that you've seen can also be translated very effectively into a P&L role, and the other skill sets that I can bring to the table from my pre-AIG days that perhaps you haven't seen yet." And so that's how the conversation went. And went through the interview process, and long story short, was given the opportunity to be the GM for AIG Philippines, in a role I spent the last 7 years in. But I guess I mentioned that because it highlights maybe the diversity of career paths, which I think are potential in just about any organization. But in two cases with AIG, I think I've had maybe a contrarian career path, both into the organization from a military background, which again, historically, AIG just, some companies have different MBA schools they recruit from, or different demographics or different parts of the country they recruit from. So it's kind of normal for most countries or companies, and AIG just didn't have a military recruiting engine there, like GE, for example. So that was kind of unique with my career path. And then certainly going from an operational background into a GM role and a P&L leadership role for what is a commercial insurance company that specializes in big and complex risks, to come into that role without an underwriting or even a distribution background was also a contrarian career path. But one which I think also illustrates that it's not always the expected backgrounds or expected pedigrees that are the only ones that can be successful in a role. I think it is more about competencies and ability to learn and apply that learning. So anyways, so that's kind of some high points of my career path with AIG. I finished off when I left the organization. I come back to the Philippines, but because of my previous experience with our operations, Then I was also overseeing our Asia shared services. At the same time, I was overseeing our insurance company, and eventually was also named as the transformation officer for the region. So I actually had three hats I was wearing for AIG, which is more a reflection of the talent that I had in the teams, particularly in the Philippines and Malaysia, and the ability, for it's me or any one person to have three roles, because I had such a rich depth of talent and expertise within underwriting, as well as operations, as well as claims. And it gave us great depth in the organization. So I could really afford to be more the conductor of the orchestra, because I had a first chair violin and a first chair cello and a first chair bass, and a second chair and a third chair, with the rich bench of talent that we had. So it was quite an exciting, quite exciting ride, quite exciting experience with AIG, but also with the different roles and different opportunities that I had with that organization.
It was. I remember at the time you were, I think the only guy who had both a nighttime job running the shared services operation and then a daytime job running the what you call the commercial side of the business, which for people watching, that's where you actually sell insurance to big organizations to really make sure that they're safe, and they can maintain their employment and so forth, operations. I didn't know you had this third job on the transformation side. So some of the key points you mentioned is being a contrarian is okay, and diversity. Also, you mentioned, or at least what I got, was just saying yes. When a company said, do you want to move to Malaysia to run an operation, or do you want to move to Asia from, I can't remember where you were in the southern United States, you said yes, whereas others did not say yes. Why do you think you said yes and others didn't? With just your military background? Because also your family had to say yes as well, right? If you've got a wife who's, against you, it's going to be pretty hard. How did that all come together?
Yeah, a couple elements there. Certainly family, first and foremost. With anything you do in life, if your spouse, and your children at a certain point, aren't in it, then you probably have your priorities, wrong or backwards in the first place, and you're not going to be happy, and therefore you're not going to be successful either. So clearly, knowing what, from the personal aspects, in terms of lifestyle, location, career paths for your spouse as well, make sure that that's compatible. Definitely the critical first, thing you have to ask and answer for yourself and for your family. But I think the other aspect of saying yes is, I guess I said yes in retrospect, or maybe at the time, within certain boundaries. Yes, in that I was open for something new and different. Yes, I was absolutely open for a global assignment. Yes, I was open for the unexpected challenge. And to be honest with you, in 2003, when I was having this first conversation, the Philippines wasn't on my map either. And so when this opportunity, came open, and I almost laugh about my own myopia in terms of, my career pathing, and my thought was, okay, this is a good opportunity to come to Asia as an entry point. But really, I really want to be in the markets like, in India or China or Singapore or Hong Kong or Japan, because my thought at that point is that's where the most dynamism was, and was going to be, and most innovation. So little did I know, even myself, that my career would end up in Southeast Asia over the following 16 years. 13 of which was spent at least based here in the Philippines. But yeah, so I guess the yes was okay. Yes, it's a new experience, and yes, because I can see an opportunity here, both in terms of a functional and expertise area, but also a geography. But I can also see that as a stepping stone or a path, to the next two or even three steps. But yeah, little did I know that this would be the biggest step and stepping stone of that career move. I think it's like many things about being open-minded, but to an extent where where that's going to lead, even if it's or you just have a strategy, an idea of what path it's going to take you on. It's not just it's certainly not a dead end, or certainly not a blind path that you're saying yes to.
Sure. But yeah, saying yes and being flexible is a good attribute, I would say, and you've done well with it. Mark, coming to Asia, and one risk you have is you kind of cut off your links to your home country, and a lot of people, do have a valid concern about that. Now, you have done fantastically, successfully on this. Do you recommend to others, like with your own children, will you recommend they get international experience, or should they focus on their home country in the US? Or, how are you advising them, and how would you advise other young people building their careers?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the question of, would I advise global experience or some sort of global assignment to anybody? Yeah, the answer is absolutely yes. I mean, if you look at our world today, whether you're with a domestic company in any country or a multinational company, you're going to encounter a supplier network that's going to be global. You're going to encounter goods or manufacturers that are going to be global, and supply chains that are going to be global. Heck, if you pick up the phone and need to dial for tech help, you're going to be in a global environment like that. So no one can get away from a global environment. The more you can understand that, the better equipped you are going to be to interact or lead in an environment like that. So the answer is absolutely yes. But I think it's also, maybe those are the obvious factors, especially, here we are in this virtual world where, I think the next, 5 to 10 years, the pace of globalization is going to accelerate, so much more because, borders and physical presence matter even less than they did a year ago. But the other aspect of a global assignment, I guess, to me, it's more broad about learning how to learning how to deal with the unexpected. And this is just one aspect of it, to go into a new and unexpected culture, a new unexpected environment, have to figure out the cultural dynamics, the language in certain cases, the distribution mechanisms, level of development or technology that's being deployed. I mean, all those aspects, it teaches you how to learn and how to adapt. That maybe it sounds kind of trite, but I think that's probably underappreciated, undervalued by so many people in their personal lives and their career lives. And I say personal lives because it goes back to that statement that you have to first be mobile in your personal life in order to be mobile in your professional life, and the two have to go hand in hand. But also, if you are, then it can also enhance your personal life as well, because for most of us, there is an economic reality that we've got to go where the jobs are, or we've got to build our career path to hit our personal objectives as well. So I think that if you've done right and with some blessings along the way, a global assignment is absolutely a career enhancer, and even probably in the future, at least not having a global experience or understanding will definitely be a detractor from anyone's career.
Yeah, that's a very good advice. I'm glad that was kind of a leading question. I knew you would answer yes, and I was hoping you could really let them have it. So yeah, international experience or exposure certainly is a big plus. Now, Mark, another thing, an interesting challenge you've had is, while you were at AIG, and not to just that you're new with Reed Elsevier, so it's not that, I mean, it's a great organization, just we don't have as much history to talk about yet there. But at AIG, they went through a difficult phase, got in a bit of trouble during the financial crisis, did very well coming back out of it. But along the way, you had a very big challenges that you were faced with. You had new bosses. It seemed what I heard was on a regular basis, almost every 8 months or something, you'd have a new boss, each one with a new different idea. How do you work with but yet you stayed? And I can tell you, I saw many other people in that organization leave, as happened. why did you stay, and not just stay, but prosper along the way? Why do you think that you were different? You talk about yourself being a contrarian. How would you explain this to someone else building their career? What was different about you, and what happened?
Yeah, I mean, so certainly the defining factor for AIG in the last decade or slightly longer than a decade was the global financial crisis, and that's that's public knowledge. So maybe a couple of reflections, on that event. One was there's nothing like a crisis to really separate separate people's values and really define who people are. I remember was it September the 9th or so, sitting on TV, watching, unfortunately, people from Lehman Brothers, on TV, knocking doors, carrying boxes, as Lehman had closed their doors. And it was just a couple of days later where the big question was, what was AIG's financial condition? And would there be relief extended to AIG, or would we be in a similar scenario? At that point, we had 1,000+ employees here in the Philippines, with very similar questions. But at those moments, you saw some people, maybe running for the doors, or if not running for the doors, just a lot of people drawing inward, thinking of themselves and the concerns that they would have, but not thinking about what's the impact on those around me, or how can I help those around me, or how can I build for the good of to build through this experience. And so, you really saw a separation of people's, who was ready to rise up to that occasion and who wasn't, especially, in the months and the couple of years that followed, the amazing story of AIG was that, there was extensive relief that was offered by the U.S. government, $182 billion. But the real work over the next couple of years was paying back every cent of that, $182 billion plus another $22 billion, I believe, in profit or interest to taxpayers of the United States. And I remember it was about 3 years later, there was a great ad campaign that AIG used in the United States. It was, I think, it was basically around, "Thank you, America," and it was AIG employees, saying thank you. And it was an expression of, here's what, yes, we had some extraordinary relief that was granted to us, but because of that, as our role as an insurance company, we also were able to prop up so much of the rest of the financial services industry in the U.S. and therefore the rest of the economy. And to do that in a way which we could pay every cent back, as well as a profit to the U.S. taxpayers. There's a lot of pride in that, because the work that went into that was tremendous, and especially through a time period of doubt, massive change, massive for business results, and transforming the business. But when I think back on those times, I don't remember, and I don't think about the pressure. I think about the people. I think about the reactions. I think about those who stepped up and led. I think about those who created, weekly town halls to reach out to all the employees and tell the good, the bad, and the ugly. Here's what's going on, but here's our strategy. Here's what we're doing. Here's what we need you to do, and here's how it fits in our strategy. And here's what we're going to achieve at the end of this. And so it was the leadership from certain people in the organization, and the responsiveness from our employees and around the world. At that point, I was based here in the Philippines, so I saw our Philippine workforce and later on our Malaysia workforce most closely. But the dedication and the engagement and ability to rise up to a challenge was just tremendous. So those are my key recollections from the global financial crisis, and probably most importantly the couple of years that followed. Working to rebuild the company, to pay back what we owed, and to do so in a way that was healthy for the U.S. economy, as well as the global economy, as well as for all of our insureds and all of our customers. And I take a lot of pride in that and where we've come. But the other aspect about this, well, that was kind of the crisis mode. AIG has also been on an extended turnaround from that time period as well. And I think there's a lot of, that's where, I've seen a lot of bosses as well, because we've gone through a couple of different strategic shifts and changes, or different phases where we accomplished one phase of a transformation plan, and then we had to go on to the next, and that invariably led to some management changes as well. I think in my last 3 years with AIG, I had probably 8 different bosses. I had 3 different jobs, so I had maybe three different bosses in a matrix structure, but probably 8 during that time period, which in maybe some ways is a little extreme, but it's not too unusual for a multinational company in a matrix structure. But yeah, it does definitely. You've got to have a lot of EQ. I think you also have to do a lot of work to understand when there's a management change or a new leader, why. Organizations don't change leaders, hopefully healthy ones don't change leaders on a whim. There's a reason for that, and usually it's a strategic shift or a different direction or a change that's envisioned or desired. And so if you can't connect with that, and can't, in some cases you have to draw that out from your leader. In some cases you got to help work with them and help them work through what is that strategy for the future. But if you can do that, then hopefully you can also demonstrate your value to the organization, because the value, at least in my roles, especially as a general manager, it's not protecting, or it's not the administration of the legal entity. That's important, and it's critical to the community and to our responsibilities to the communities in which we operate. But that's really not value added. That's what any leader should do, or any CEO should do. The finances and compliance and risk management. The true value comes from looking at, how do I grow this business? Or how do I make it stronger? How do I grow it for the future? How do I plot out that strategy and then execute on that strategy? And most of that means, with the people and the talent that really are doing the heavy lifting in the execution. And I think that's where, as a leader, you got to be able to do that, but also demonstrate that or show that to a boss that, maybe I'm going in this direction, but if there's a different direction that we now either see or need, I can shift, that as well.
Okay. Yeah, EQ. I think you are kind of at the top of the scale for emotional maturity. I would say, seem to get along with everybody. And still able to get things done. Now, Mark, you've seen we both have, everybody has seen a lot of good people come into your organization, for instance, people who have solid education backgrounds, experience, and so forth, but they do things that maybe make it hard for them to move up in the organization, or even to sabotage themselves. What things have you seen where good people, and it breaks your heart, all of us, we like to see everybody survive, but what are things that you've seen that really hold people back in their careers from moving up? What advice can you give?
I think the key theme there is probably short-term thinking, or a short-term horizon. It's certainly connected to EQ and emotional intelligence. Which thank you by the way for the compliment. I'm not sure if everybody would agree with you in your statement, but I certainly appreciate it. But I think the short-term decision making, and you see that a lot in high growth or fast growth markets, especially where there's a lot of new opportunities, a lot of needs, and you see people jumping jobs and jumping to the next best thing. And that certainly has been, a key facet or phenomenon in the BPO industry, especially at the earlier stages of development and of roles. And so, well, on one hand, you have to, we all have objectives, and it is a free marketplace. I've just made a move to a new organization, myself. But it certainly has to be around, what's your long-term objective? And I think when people just see, well, here's certainly a raise, I'm going to make a move here, or I'm going to make it move, especially into a different functional area, just because it's a promotion. I think that's probably the most common, maybe career foible that I see, where it may be a 10% or a 20% bump in a raise or a promotion, but is that really the job that you want to do? Is that what is going to get you up in the morning, or in this industry, get you up in the middle of the night or in the middle of the afternoon to work through the night because you're that excited about that role? Or even if you are willing to do that, what skills are you learning that are going to build your core competency, just as if you were a business or an entrepreneur, or an organization that has a core competency and a strategy, so do career paths. And there's an opportunity cost for every day or every hour or every year you spend in a certain role, learning a certain skill set. That's a year you're not building yourself in a different direction. And I don't think a lot of people understand, especially young professionals, because when you're young, you got the whole your whole career ahead of you in many, many years. But when I look back, in my career, I wish I had a lot of those years back. I wish I had reinvested some of that time in a different direction. At one point, I wish I had spent 10 years as an underwriter instead of operations. But yeah, so those are just all examples of or maybe examples of the opportunity cost of where we spend our time. And definitely, time is the most valuable commodity that we could possibly have.
Yeah, so that's good advice. We don't hear that enough, Mark. Having a longer term focus, job hopping and things like that just do not help a career. And that's a really good point, because you see a lot of good young people who really do destroy their career jumping to get a little bit more of a raise each time. Okay, so that's a good one. Mark, you're kind of a contrarian to me. A lot of people don't know that you are half Myanmarese, which I just find so interesting. And I think maybe gives you, your foot on both sides of the world, Asia as well as the US. And it really, makes you a fulfilled person. Now, Filipinos who want to build a real international career, I often see them become intimidated by, fast talking, demanding international managers. Now, I know you have helped to develop the careers of a lot of successful people that you've worked with over the years who've gone on to other organizations. How do you develop Filipinos to make them real international managers? Because the stereotype, many Filipinos say that, that they're so quiet and shy, and they let others talk over top of them. And I don't know, I put a lot into that question, but how do you develop people, and how would you advise Filipinos to really come out of their shell and really stand their ground when they need to?
Yeah, I think there's two aspects to that question. One is culture and cultural dynamics.
Yes.
Every culture, there are aspects of every culture and interaction, and that can be both a strength, but in certain environments, it can also be a detractor, or at least a factor that makes it difficult to have a fit. And that's true whether it's Americans and Japanese, or Koreans and Chinese, or Filipinos and Americans. There's different factors at play there. I think part of it is my father immigrated from Burma, now Myanmar. Before I was born, so I'm first generation Asian American. Although I grew up in the Midwest U.S. In very Midwestern roots, living in Illinois, Colorado, Nebraska, Oklahoma. But I still had one foot in an Asian camp. And even though my father was naturalized as a U.S. citizen and remained in the Midwest, it certainly gave me a perspective that many Americans wouldn't have, at least growing up. So that's certainly, it's a bridge, and it certainly is helpful in one regard. But I think there's also it's not so much about Filipinos and the rest of the world. There's also some universal truths here as well around, I guess, confidence to break out of your shell and to either take a position or put yourself in an uncomfortable position where maybe you don't understand or aren't quite comfortable or know what somebody else is thinking or what the reaction is. And do you step back and draw in, or do you step forward and engage? So it really is a choice about stepping forward to engage. And I think the perspective I would offer, particularly to my Filipino colleagues, then would be, I wish I had a dollar, or I wish I had a peso every time I heard one of our global managers or one of our stakeholders or one of our customers say, I want our Filipino management to be more aggressive. I want to see more innovation, or I want to see a stronger position from our teams in the Philippines. I hear that all the time.
Yeah.
But at the same token, when I walk the floors here, or I talk to our managers, and when I see like an AIG, some of the best technical underwriters in the world, sitting in Makati here in the Philippines, the quality of talent tremendous. Heck, we export so many of them, and they go abroad to fill these roles. So we have all this talent and all this capability. Yet at the same time, I hear, I'd like to see, I'd like to see more of that, or I'd like to see our Filipinos leaders lead more. So I think if I could can those conversations and play them back, to the work to our leaders here, and they could see that perspective that, they may be fast talking or hard talking, or maybe as an American we may be too brash and more apt to talk and less apt to listen. But behind that veneer, there is an actual desire or a demand that have a position and take that position forward, and that's a strong positive in most organizations. That's what people are looking for. I certainly hear it every day. That's what people around the world are looking for, and I see the capabilities that exist here. So it's a definite match. We just got to get through that veneer of that cultural divide. But I think if people understand that, it makes it easier to break out of a cultural mold or take a different approach to bridge that gap between cultures.
Yeah. Okay. Good advice. Because you're right. I've heard the same thing so many times from people who say that their Filipino teams are top in the world, compared to other countries, and the way they analyze these things. But yet they don't speak up. Then they let the lower performing places talk over top of them. So it's a really so if we can help Filipinos to do that, inspire them, that would be good. And certainly you're a good example of a guy who's done that. Mark, you started early in your career in the military, and it's quite an interesting story. Can you tell your military story and kind of make it sound as exciting as you can? Because it is an exciting story.
Well, yeah, I probably don't have to try to make it sound exciting, because it certainly was. And I've got 10 years of anecdotes and memories. Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, I would say that my military background, my first I spent 4 years in training and 9 years on active duty in the U.S. Marine Corps. Absolutely, shapes everything I do today. And there's not a day that goes by that I don't pull from my Marine Corps, leadership experiences and apply them in very relevant ways in the organizations that I'm part of. My background in the military was I grew up in the Boy Scouts, outdoors, military history. So it was a fairly natural fit in terms of thinking about what do I want to do in my career. The military aspect, as well as the excitement, adventure at that point, being a young single male, that was an easy fit for a lifestyle as well. And in that time, so yeah, it was to me. It seemed like a very natural path for me to take, and I loved it. It filled every desire that I had, including the desire to give back, to defend, and to invest in a country and rights and freedoms that were core to who I was then and what I am today, and what's important to me. So yeah, it was much more than a profession. It really was a life and a lifestyle. But I would also say that I was extremely fortunate as well. For health reasons, I had to leave the military before 9/11, and the military and the military experience after 9/11, at least for the U.S., very, very different story. Clearly, ongoing wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, ongoing deployments, and a very real fear of death and physical damage and psychological damage. So probably my view of the military is I won't say romanticized, but I was very fortunate in my timing and the years I spent in the Marine Corps. And most of my anecdotes, most of my stories about the military, kind of reflect a different time period, pre 9/11. Some of the most, I guess, adventurous things that I did in the Marine Corps. One was probably adventurous, well, maybe unexpected. My first operational assignment as a brand new second lieutenant with 2 weeks of experience actually in the operating forces was being sent into Los Angeles, the streets of Los Angeles during the riots in 1992. At that point, there was riots that broke out there, and eventually sent in federal troops, a battalion of Marines and a battalion of Army soldiers. And since we were on airstrip alert at that point, we had to be ready to go anywhere in 4 hours. And I remember getting the phone call saying, "Hey, get the company back to Camp Pendleton. You're deploying. You got 4 hours." And I remember driving back to the base thinking, "Okay, do I have on my desert camouflage uniforms? We're going back to Kuwait. This is shortly after the first Gulf War." And thinking about, do I have my brown skivvies and my brown socks? And when we got back to the base, okay, where are we going? What plane did we get on? It was get on Interstate 5 and drive north into LA. You're going into Los Angeles. So talk about being prepared or being prepared for change, or need to be prepared for change. That was the last place we ever expected to be deployed in an operational assignment. And that was the first place that I went to in the Marine Corps. But maybe to tie that into relevance to my career path and how that really shapes who I am today. It's really a story about thinking about change and very fast mental mindset changes and shifts. Because even then, while we weren't necessarily expecting, for an operational assignment in the streets of Los Angeles, the Marine Corps even then had a philosophy, which was we articulated the threeblock war. And the threeblock war was this concept that as a young Marine, maybe 19, 20-year-old corporal, you need to be prepared to go into one block and be working on a humanitarian relief mission, handing out relief supplies or food or helping rebuild after a typhoon or a disaster. So completely peacetime, peacekeeping mission. But in the second block over, it might be a slightly different environment where now maybe it truly is a peacekeeping mission where it's not a combat mission, but you're maybe working to enforce a police action or a UN action or establish law and order in a location, maybe like a riot in Los Angeles or in Somalia, where we were there to hand out relief supplies, but it very quickly turned into a war between different warlords, and sometimes we were caught in the middle. Yeah. And then the third block over, now it's a full-scale war, and now it's a combat mission, and you're under threat of death or violence, and indeed you have to use in a very judgmental way violence and combat power to achieve an objective. And we called it the three-block war because at that point it was somewhat conceptual that's how quickly you'd have to transition from one environment to the other. But if we look at the U.S. experience and our allies in Iraq and Afghanistan, that's pretty close to reality. And that mental shift to go from one extreme to the next, and back again, that is change, and innovation, and innovative thinking, and adaptability to change in its most extreme environment. And especially if you think about a military where you don't have the opportunity for highly centralized control. The authority and the responsibility of a 20-year-old corporal that we place in his or her hands and judgment to make life or death decisions about his or her own Marines, as well as civilians or other people who are in the way. It's an awesome responsibility. Yes. And the Marine Corps trains people every day at a very young age for a leadership responsibility of that magnitude and that consequence, and does so extremely effectively. So that's probably the most impactful lesson and kind of philosophy of many that I've taken with me through my career. And luckily, it hasn't been about life or death decisions since then, but it has certainly been about how do you quickly adapt and change your mindset, change your philosophy, and then change your execution plan or your strategy to adapt to what can be very rapidly changing situations. Whether it's a global financial crisis, whether it's an acquisition, whether it's a change in marketplace, a change in different competitor dynamics. Again, not as consequential in terms of life and death, but certainly takes a mental agility that I learned in the Marine Corps.
Sure. And Mark, now you were in, if I recall, you were in Iraq and Afghanistan or Iraq?
No, that I was, as I mentioned, I was pre 9/11. So I actually had a interesting time period. I joined. I was in ROTC in training for 4 years during the latter part of the Cold War. My senior year in college was when the first Gulf War.
First Gulf. That's what it was.
Yeah, and so I was a midshipman or an officer candidate during the first Gulf War. At that point, I couldn't walk into a bar in Austin, Texas, without someone buying me a drink once they saw I had a short hair, and clearly I was in the military, although I wasn't on active duty at all. But so I was commissioned as a lieutenant in 1991. And then I left the military in 2000, shortly before the Twin Towers, and then of course the consequences of a lot more foreign involvement and U.S. involvement in wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. So I thought I had a pretty high op tempo, but it was mostly enforcing the peace or enforcing the sanctions from Kuwait against Iraq. But it was based out of Kuwait, some time in Somalia, in LA, a lot of time during operational training in and around Asia, mostly based from a ship during that time period. But yeah, a very, very different world and very, very different experience from my colleagues that served after 9/11.
Yeah. But still, it was, if I remember, you were in Kuwait and you were a young guy leading a large group of men. How many people were you leading?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, the Marine Corps and the military overall, entrust a great deal of responsibility to young men and women at very young ages. As a 22-year-old second lieutenant, I was responsible for it was a mortar platoon, 68 Marines, including 3 staff non-commissioned officers and 10 sergeants. All of whom had more operational tenure than I had. In fact, my staff non-commissioned officers that I work with, they had 12, 13, 15 years of experience. And so as a new lieutenant, though I was responsible for that organization, but even that had lasting impact in terms of I guess me as a manager, as a leader, post-military, because I remember very clearly as a new lieutenant, meeting my platoon. It was a little unusual. Most lieutenants would start with a rifle platoon, an operational unit about half that size. And this sort of organization or this sort of team was for more of a senior lieutenant. As it happened, there was accident circumstances. There was an opening, and so when I walked into the battalion, I was asked. In that case, in the Marine Corps, you're not asked; you're told where to go. So I didn't have a chance to say yes or no, but I was responsible for this more senior platoon. So it was a little unusual, but the base facts were the same. Where I had to look at myself, and I remember having this conversation with myself. Okay, yeah, I spent a long time in training, but so have these staff non-commissioned officers and NCOs. What value do I add as a 22-year-old lieutenant to an organization of 68 people with a combined experience of 200 or 300 years of experience? But it's a lesson I've taken with me every year and in every assignment of my life. What value do I add? Just because I have a title of manager or vice president or CEO or responsibility, that's not the value of my role. I always have to be asking myself, what value do I bring to this organization? Because just having that title doesn't connotate any value whatsoever. It is just a title. So in that case, I wasn't the expert in employing a certain weapon system like a mortar. I wasn't the most accurate user of that weapon. Now, my challenge was that I had to learn quickly and gain credibility, so I could. But I was probably never going to be the best at it. I expected my lance corporals and sergeants to be the best. That was their job. They were the technical experts and they were the technical employers of that weapon system. The value I added to that organization was the tactics and the operations. How do we connect an operational plan with the capabilities of this organization? How do we customize our task force organization and employ the weapon system to meet a bigger plan? So it really was the tactics and operations and employment. That's where I added value to that organization. And again, you had to have credibility. You had to lead from the front. You had to still be an expert, even without the same level of experience. So you had to check those boxes, but that's not the same as adding value to the organization. And I've had the same conversation with myself every time I've taken on a new role, and even every day in an old role. What value do I add today? Am I adding value just because I was promoted to this role or was given this role? No, it's what do I bring to the role, and how do I take the organization forward? So to me, that was a good lesson to have at a young age, because it stuck with me throughout my career.
It's interesting, but how many other guys, as you know, in just in Philippines alone, how many senior leaders came from a military background and have done very well. Even, I talked to a French guy a little while ago. I hadn't known. I did another podcast, and he also spent a couple of years in the military. Not something usual but he also points to that initial experience as key to his career development and so forth. But also, if I can say, Mark, it's not every day I get to talk to a Marine leader and so forth, but it really is quite a big contribution that the United States uniquely makes to the world, and really acts as the world's, policeman, I guess, is the one. I might even call it a babysitter, but really do sacrifice a lot. And, it's a reason why we're living in a much more peaceful time than we have ever lived in the history of our species, and if I can say sometimes, I'll say it, I consider myself half European, but, sometimes in Europe, people are a bit critical of Americans, but when European leaders ran the world, we had war from a constant basis. And really for the past 1,000 years, we've lived in war. That all stopped in 1945 when the United States took over global leadership. And we have had people like you, families giving their sons and daughters to really take a leadership role in keeping the world safe. And we've seen a dramatic reduction in war throughout the world. So tremendous. So lead me into my next question. What about your next generation? Would you advise your children to go into the military, and would you still advise that to others?
Yeah, just a question on global assignments, Richard. I would say absolutely. My son right now, he's very excited and interested in going to one of the military academies in the U.S. and I hope he can. So I think he'd be a great addition to our leadership ranks there. Clearly, I spent 10 years of my life in the military. As I mentioned before, it wasn't just it wasn't a job. It really was a passion. It was a calling, because it connected an income. It was an excitement factor for me. I liked the role. I love the leadership, working with people, but also the larger calling of protecting values that they were certainly critical to the protection of U.S. interests, but also for the larger good of the world, which I certainly believe in, as you were mentioning. some of my proudest moments, actually being overseas and actually here in the Philippines was after Ondoy in 2009. I remember actually being out in the street and walking down the street, and I heard some helicopters flying overhead, and some of my instincts kicked in. I was like, "Oh, those are CH-46s. They must be Marine Corps helicopters." And looked up, and there was 4 U.S. Marine Corps helicopters flying in formation over Manila. But they were bringing relief supplies to flooding victims here. Same thing in 2013 with Yolanda. I was doing at that point with AIG, doing a claim survey, and a helicopter flying over Ormoc and Palo, in some of the ravaged areas there. And as we flew over Leyte Gulf, there was a U.S. Navy amphibious readiness group. They were there to bring freshwater supplies and relief supplies. So those are reflections on not just the military in terms of the enforcement aspect, but also the humanitarian aspects of the mission of the military. Those are proud moments for me, and those are also moments where I for the reasons about leadership and lessons in life and leadership and management. I think the military is a great experience for any young man or woman, and then also for the larger values in terms of what you do for the rest of the world. But in this discussion, today in the pandemic world where we talk about frontliners, I think this is also interesting as well, because there's a lot of ways to give back and be a frontliner, and I think that's probably, to me, that's a more important message for the next generation in any country. My fervent hope is everybody does some time as a frontliner, whether it's a teacher, whether it's a nurse, whether it's as a missionary, as an EMT or a first responder. There's a lot of ways you can give back, which is more than just a paycheck. And I would hope that every generation, has the desire to do that, whether it's for their entire career, which is great, or even for some time in their career, because I think those are life lessons, as well as living the values that we profess. So for those reasons, I think the military is one of many great choices and important choices for our younger generation.
Sure. And I just hope, but getting back to the U.S. contribution to, our global species, it really has been tremendous, but they seem to get a lot of abuse for it. And so I'm concerned whether they're going to be interested to continue doing it, and who can blame them from pulling back. But in any case, really a tremendous contribution, and pleased to see you. I can say for many of us that we appreciate the things that you guys do. Okay, let's get over to you as a person, Mark. How would you describe yourself? Would you say you're introverted, extroverted? Were you good in school, not so good at school? Did you follow the rules? Were you rebellious? How would you describe yourself, Mark?
Certainly, I wasn't a rebel. I think in the mid '80s, when I was in high school, I was part of the. I guess we were called the kind of the more preppy crowd. I guess at that point, so I definitely wasn't a visible rebel at all. I think though I think I was probably rebellious in a way that I probably thought I was more mature than I was, and I guess that's true for any teenager, right? But at that point, the big challenges or the big concerns for parents, were drinking and driving and drugs, and those are still concerns, but now they've been compounded with other things like social media and the peer pressure that comes through, and the psychological pressures of a social media and online generation. But at that point, the biggest concerns were drunk driving and drugs. So I remember I've already told my teenage kids this, so this won't be anything new if they listen to this. But me and my friends in high school, we would get together. At that point, the drinking age was just turning from 18 to 21. And we sometimes we would have alcohol. But even at that age, though, if anybody was drinking, when they came in the house, they put their keys in the bowl, and no one was going to drive if they were drinking, or they were going to spend the night. And that was just kind of the pact that we had with me and my friends. So I think there was a level of maturity there, even around doing something we shouldn't have been doing in terms of drinking alcohol, but doing so in at least, I can't say a responsible way, but at least in a not irresponsible way to protect us from the worst risks of such behavior. So that probably sums up a lot of my maybe early age either rebellion or where I was somewhat contrarian to some of the rules that I should have been following. But you asked if I was was or am an extrovert or introvert. It's funny, we have this discussion in my household quite a bit, because I think me and one of my children were very much or more extroverts relatively in our family. And my wife and at least one of my daughters is very much the introvert, have introverted tendencies. So we compare and contrast ourselves. But I wouldn't really call myself an extrovert. I've had a lot of roles where, especially as a CEO or a GM or in a sales type of role, or any leadership role, you have to be out and engaged with people or your marketplace or your customers and stakeholders. So I think I adapt to the role and the needs of the role. But sometimes, I'd like to just go home and watch a movie or just be with my family or a small crowd. I'm not the late night go out and drink and party sort of person. So I'm not sure if that makes me an introvert or extrovert, but so it's probably somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. Okay. And your upbringing, Mark, how did your parents raise you? Were they strict with you? Were they let you do what you want? How would you describe that?
I mean, so it was very much, I had a lot of independence when I was growing up. You mentioned my background as a first generation Asian American. My father came to the U.S. He married an American woman, my mother. But they were divorced at a very young age, or when I was at a very young age. So from second grade onwards, my mother was essentially a single mother raising two boys. She ended up after my third grade year, she moved off to another city, started law school, and put herself through law school for the next 3 years, raising two young boys, starting out in fourth grade and sixth grade, and then from there onwards until we were in college. She was a corporate attorney, but also as a single mother, she had, she was working full time, and a lot of times she had to travel as well. Those, that was the needs of the job that she was in. And so, it afforded me a lot of opportunity or needs where I had to be more on my own. And even times, when she would travel, me and my brother we'd be in high school, we'd take care of ourselves at home. Probably not too unusual, maybe in an environment like here in the Philippines in terms of the level of independence at a young age, but not so typical maybe in the U.S. environment at that point. Luckily, we didn't get ourselves in too much trouble. Didn't have too many unauthorized parties in the house. But I think we learned how to take care of ourselves, and we learned a level of independence. But also with the foundation of strong parental support, both from my mother and my father, who had to be more distant because he lived in a different state. But with a great deal of support and certainly love. But where they couldn't be there as much as they wanted to be in person, with us. I think that, and also, because my mother was a corporate attorney and she ended up having to go where the economic opportunities were, we ended up moving around quite a bit. I lived in, 8 or 9 different states, went to 3 different high schools, maybe 6 or 7 different schools up until college. It was an environment of continually moving, not in an international realm, but certainly within the U.S. So I think it made it relatively easy to take one step further from Birmingham, Alabama to the Philippines, later on in my career when I moved here to Asia.
Interesting. Okay, that is a very interesting background then, Mark. Mark, there's a lot of discussion about whether leadership is something you're born with or whether you can make, the nature nurture argument. Where would you put yourself on that? Do you think, leaders are made or are they born that way? What do you think?
I think there's two components here. One goes back to you're asking, am I an introvert or extrovert?
Yes.
I think there is a natural component about people and their tendencies to be introverted or extroverted or and comfortable in that environment. So I think it starts with some natural tendencies, but I think most skills in dealing with people, create a comfort level. And then also creates either an interest or a willingness to be in sort of roles like a leadership role that requires more engagement with people, as well as some hard decisions as well from time to time. I like one of the constructs that I like a lot, and I've used in most of my management teams, is the DISC profiling. It's a personality profile, DISC, and there's different versions of it as well. But the one I'm most familiar with is, there's 4 quadrants, and one quadrant is more, I guess, kind of the type A sort of personality, the extrovert, and then another one is more analytical, and there's different variations in this profile. But some of my takeaways is that the dominant or type A or extroverted profiling here, one of the characteristics of that profile is that they have the ability to take on the kind of personality traits of any of the other 3 based upon the role that they're in. And to me, that's kind of a lesson in leadership, where if you're leading an insurance company, there's a certain type of role and organizational approach to take, especially when, as I've had the opportunity and the good fortune to work with some great claims adjusters and experts and great technical underwriters. I didn't have to have a heavy hand. In fact, quite the opposite. I needed to be free, take a step back to provide a direction and let them do their craft. But a different role than running a shared services organization, where it's much more operational focus, or especially in the midst of a business continuity event, earthquake or a volcano, much more heavy-handed and much more directive. But I think the point is that there's a leadership characteristics of effective leaders about knowing what leadership toolkits or persona even to bring out in certain situations and with certain teams. And I'm not saying be fake. You got to be yourself, but you can be yourself and still be more interactive or let your personality go in certain ways. And I think that's what I've taken away from like the DISC profiling of from a technical experience, but how I applied it to leader. That there's different hats I have to wear and different circumstances, and not all of them I love. I'm not a natural salesperson. I'm not the sort of person who wants to go close a sale. Some people love that. They love the challenge of the sale, or they love to, gambling and the risk of a gambling event. Some people love that and they thrive on that. That's not me though. I'm much more maybe strategic and in some ways methodical about, let's create a strategy to create a strong brand that creates a value proposition that will lead to a sale. But I'm not necessarily the person who wants to be the one closing it there. So anyways, that's a little bit of who I am, but also how I think, to the point about our leaders, are they developed? I think the point is you do have to develop characteristics across that entire DISC profile and across every role, because as a leader, you're not afforded the opportunity to step back and say, can't do this, won't do this, don't know how to do this. You've got to find a way. And a lot of times it means finding the right person to do it, but that's still finding a way to move forward on all fronts.
Okay, so that's good. So you can be a CEO without sales experience, because many, other guys point to sales experience as one of their big, attributes that help them. But you seem to have done very well without that. But I guess you had a package that compensated or whatever. So many other things that you had. Okay.
Well, I think part of it's around the operational definition of sales experience. What do we? There's a sales function, and there's a competency around around closing a sale. That's personality driven and relationship driven, and also thrives in that sort of challenge. That's one definition of sales. But I mean, to the point where if you're going to be a business leader, you absolutely have to be competent in sales in terms of growing revenue, delivering a value-added product to a customer, and making the value proposition where your customers are excited or at least willing to buy that product. So absolutely, there is a sales competency that any CEO has to have. Otherwise, you'll be the CEO of a shrinking business until at some point you don't have a top line anymore. So yes, absolutely. But I think a lot of it but you have to be the one that's there, necessarily closing that sale. Yeah, I've done that, and I can do that. But I am honest with myself when I look in the mirror. That's not my most exciting role. The roles that have been very exciting for me, that have been I would say are sales oriented, really come more around maybe the aspect of business development, and creating a value proposition, and then making sure your customers, and you're working with your customers to understand that value proposition. I think back with my role as AIG, when I came back to the Philippines to lead our insurance company, that was a huge time of transition. We were number 4 in the marketplace from premiums or revenue, but we weren't very successful in terms of profitability. And that's because we were kind of an all things to all people insurer. We had consumer insurance, we had commercial insurance, we had different distribution channels, we had different types of products with this vast plethora. And I guess I would sum it up by saying we were playing somebody else's game. Every one of the local insurance companies here, we want to be number 1, number 2, number 3 in terms of premiums, because that's the mark of a strong, successful, solvent insurance company. But that's somebody else's game. The reality is that the mark of a strong commercial insurance company is who's going to pay your claim. And in most cases, insurance, there's a reinsurance trail in terms of who actually ultimately holds that risk, and who is therefore going to pay out a 1 billion peso claim if you have a major event, right? And that was AIG's strength. Ultimately, we wanted to be the holder of the risk. And sometimes it meant we were a direct insurer, and sometimes we were a reinsurer. But what that meant was that the gross premium statistics, the revenue statistics that most people talked about or saw, mostly irrelevant. That was just who was writing the policy. And most of those companies actually turned around and 99% of it, they reinsured to a company like AIG. Okay. But my point was that even within AIG, we were playing somebody else's game. We were trying to be number 4 in the marketplace, even if it meant that the investment in infrastructure, in distribution, and in branch offices, and in a physical presence in so many areas was tremendous. We put huge pressure on our profitability by playing someone else's game. Yeah. So our game really was to make the value proposition that you don't need. In many cases, you don't even want your insurer to be number 1, 2, or 3, or 4. That's an irrelevant statistic. What you want your customers to understand is who's paying the claim, who's making that decision, and it may mean that, for example, in AIG's case, we ended up going from number 4 to number 10 in rankings in terms of our gross premiums. But in terms of premiums that we retained, about 99%. Of our commercial risks we retained and we paid. And when it came to things like cyber risks and understanding those sort of risks, developing a product and bringing that to the marketplace, we could do that because we were the ones that ultimately had to understand how to pay that claim and what risks to underwrite or what not to. So I guess again, go back to the question of sales, it's that value proposition and understanding the value proposition to me, that is an aspect of sales. And to me, that was one example where by helping to shape the understanding of value for our customers, we became more successful than in growing the business, the commercial business. That was really our core and what was our target market. So another aspect of sales, which to me is extremely exciting and extremely fun.
Yeah, and I'm glad you explained it like that, because some people I find, good quality people who put down the sales competence because they think of people, at the mall who try to sell them condo units or something like that. And that's not sales. It's really high level strategic business development work like what you described. That's what, and really doing things that matter for your customers and things. So anyway, I'm glad you made that point, Mark. Mark, motivation. Motivation is another one of these nature nurture things. Do you think motivation is something that people are born with, or can it be learned? And also, how do you motivate people? What tactics do you use?
Yeah. So on the first point, the question is it learned or is it inherent? I guess maybe I'm a little Darwinian in this perspective, and I think a lot of it is your environment and the needs of your environment.
Okay.
I've been very lucky in that, as I mentioned before, I came from a family where my parents were divorced. Both my parents were always very supportive, and I always had a safety network beneath me, from one or both my parents if I really needed it. But I also knew and expected that, after high school, it was up to me if I wanted to go to college, but I had to find a way to fund it. And at the end of college, the answer wasn't I'm going to graduate school or I'm going on from there, unless that was indeed a career path. The answer was, how are you going to pay for your house and your food and how are you going to make a living? So I think there's some very basic economic motivators that should be at the basis of every, the question of, what motivates people. Now, there, of course, are extremes there as well. And we live here in the Philippines in an environment where that's much more extreme. And I don't mean to make light of it because, these are life or death sort of decisions here. And motivation comes from the absolute necessity of having a livelihood and a future that you can provide for yourself and for your family. But I think that's why I say that, motivation isn't in most cases learned. It does come from some very basic needs. But I think for those of us who are blessed to have those basic needs met, I think a lot of it's upbringing. I think it's environment, but mostly the environment provided by your family. My role models and influence certainly have developed me. My father immigrating from Burma as a scholar here or to the U.S. He was completing his physics degree in 1962 when the older coup occurred in Myanmar or Burma at the time, and he had the choice. He had to either stop his studies and return to Burma, or they said, look, or you won't be allowed back in the country again. And he made a very difficult choice to stay in the U.S. and finish his studies. But indeed, he wasn't allowed back in the country for another 25 years and never saw his mother again. So he had to make some very difficult choices, but it was around future and opportunity, and a lot of it around the economics of how to make a life for yourself and eventually for a family. And same thing with my mother. Growing up in elementary school while she was going to law school and working at night to pay the bills. On top of that, but probably the most amazing thing about that story was that I never thought we were poor. I never thought that we were struggling because my mother worked so hard not just to get through law school and provide for us, but also make sure that we were cared for in all of our needs. So both my parents were great examples of motivation and doing what it takes to provide for a future for yourself and most importantly for your family. So I think in that regard, motivation is learned, but I don't think you can learn it in terms of it has to be modeled. And you have to see you have to see the rationale for motivation and the consequences, for those people, if you don't have a certain level of motivation to succeed, or at least to pursue the opportunities that you need to. So those are certainly the most formative, experiences or role models in terms of when I think of motivation. There's just a reality of what you have to do to make a successful opportunity, as well as to take care of your family and your loved ones as well.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Okay, Mark, maybe if I could ask you a bit about health things, because that's becoming such a big, a growing issue, certainly. And you work long hours. I mean, I mentioned before you were working a night job and a day job, and it's hard, when you do that, your health can suffer. But do you have special food and exercise programs that you're trying to follow, and how good at you are you at following them, would you say?
well, I'm laughing because Richard, my wife,
I do.
Rebecca, my Rebecca, not your Rebecca. But her whole background is in the wellness, space. She's a registered dietitian by trade. She worked in a hospital in a clinical environment, but then she's also been a personal trainer. She's a cook. She's also a professional athlete, bodybuilder. So she's really done all aspects of the whole wellness and health industry. And I don't think it's a stretch to say that I'm probably her worst client and her worst customer, especially when it comes to diet. I think my goal is definitely to be physically active, and to have sports avocations that at least keep me to some degree active, especially in this crazy COVID virtual world where we're sitting in front of our computers for 12 or 15 hours a day. You've got to force yourself to get up and do something. I invested in through Lazada in a home gym, piece by piece over the last year, that sits on the lanai. But even I go from upstairs to downstairs. That takes a degree of motivation to go spend 45 minutes doing a weight routine every day. But luckily, I've got a great trainer who will write me a personalized exercise routine, as well as a diet plan as well. So I'm fortunate in that regard, but probably where I fall short mostly is diet. I don't think I've got too many vices in life, but a sweet tooth is definitely one of them. So if you put something sweet in front of me, especially cakes, pastries, then I'm not going to be able to control myself. So that's my biggest vice and probably my biggest challenge that I have in terms of staying healthy. That, and as you mentioned, in this global environment, with customers around the world and stakeholders, and in the environment that anybody works in today with email and video calls. It's hard to carve out time to turn your mind off and to be able to sleep and get rest and get any sort of patterns there. So I think that's the other big challenge that many of us face. I wish I had an answer. I don't really. But I definitely at least know what I need to work on, because those are the two key areas that I have challenges with my health.
Good. Okay. And that it is an important thing, because sometimes young people naturally think they're going to live forever. And I can say with great certainty that they won't. And especially once you hit 50, I found I really had to watch myself. Small bad habits really became bigger habits, or bad habits. So, well, Mark, you mentioned your wife, and now she's been a key asset in your life, certainly.
You better not describe it that way to her, Richard. She may not like being called a key asset, but I would certainly agree with you in the sentiments there.
Okay, well, okay, but if you a spouse is going to really be a key asset in your career if she's bad. Because if you have a male or female who is not supporting a person's career, it's going to be very difficult to build a solid career and life, of course, and all the rest of it. But can you tell us a bit about how you met your wife, and what are some of the key reasons why, she's followed you around whenever you said, hey, I want to take everybody to Philippines, Malaysia, or God knows where. She also said yes and supported you along the way.
Yeah, so I guess we definitely are going deep here with Richard today.
I don't mind, but it's so important because that's something that
Yeah.
how many times have we seen people's careers get destroyed because of a breakup or home problems?
Yeah, and I'm kidding. I'm always happy to talk about Rebecca and my wife, because she is. We will be celebrating 25 years of marriage next year.
Wow.
And yeah, there's nothing more important to me than my wife and my family, which I think gets to your point. I guess to me, it's not a question of if she's willing to support me. I think it's the whole mindset of it really starts with what do we want? What are our values? What are we trying to achieve in our life together and with our family? And start with that perspective. And then it's, okay, well, then how does this career choice, even in the corporate world or business, how does that first fit in with our objectives? And then the second, subsequent choice is then, okay, well, yeah, if I am going to, as I was leaving the military, entering the corporate world and embarking on a business career, then the next question, are we willing to move to a certain place? We first moved to Chicago. That was pretty easy. Then we moved to Birmingham, Alabama. That was a little more difficult. And then, when the opportunity to come to Asia came up, that was a very big choice for us. But absolutely, we had to make it together. At that point, I had two babies essentially. So in some ways, it was easier because we knew at the time we got married that we had long discussions about this, and that's why we got married, was that our career aspirations were totally aligned. She wanted to stay at home, and her primary avocation being to take care of the kids. And I was totally willing and excited about my primary avocation being to provide the economic foundation for our family. So that was the first basis of alignment in terms of values that has stood the test of time in our relationship. But it was very relevant about the discussion, the decision to come to the Philippines, and of course then to stay in Asia, because at that point she wanted the freedom to be able to focus on raising our children. And so being a trailing spouse where she could pursue a career here, at least not easily at that point, wasn't an issue, wasn't a detractor at all in our first assignment. And then, so I guess the point is that it all starts with the alignment of values, and values about religion and faith, values about family and family goals, value about care for each other and how we value each other, certainly around fidelity to one another, and even just values around how we interact with each other and how we care for one another. So I'm probably not saying anything monumental, but I think that in an early stage of a relationship, or certainly a marriage, people don't think about what it is going to look like in 25 years, and how many challenges and questions like this will come up. And it's not a question of if there will be questions or challenges or conflict in the relationship. It's all a question about how you'll tackle those, or how you'll address those. And if you don't have that basis in value, and for us, for me and Rebecca, starting with faith in God and the guidance and strength that He gives us as the foundation of everything that we do. Most importantly of all, I'd be remiss if I didn't highlight that and share that, because it all flows from there. I love Rebecca beyond words. I don't believe that love in itself overcomes all. I think values and love and faith can overcome all. But I'm probably not so romantic to say that anybody that someone loves, that's the basis for a long and successful relationship. Because I think sooner or later, you'll find obstacles or challenges that may be bigger than just the love, or that will challenge you at a values level. And that will be a fundamental conflict, especially when it comes to family or kids.
Okay, that's an interesting perspective, Mark. Okay, very good. Mark, maybe if I could ask you one difficult question, you don't have to go into detail with it if you're not comfortable, but we have both seen married men get themselves into trouble who are not able to resist female temptations, and they destroy their marriages, families, and careers as a result. What are some, I don't know, advice you'd give younger guys to kind of keep them focused on their marriages and keep them out of trouble? Any advice you could give?
Yeah. I mean, when Rebecca and I were first, when we were engaged and we were talking to our pastor about getting married, he shared with us, some wisdom. And at that point he said, look, you're gonna encounter three challenges in your marriage, and the three biggest ones are going to be when you have children and the stresses that puts on a marriage and a relationship as you're pulled in different directions. The second one's going to be about finances and how you share finances and as a team and as a couple. And the third one's going to be fidelity. And then, at that point I was 25, 27 years old. I was like, oh, well, these are all easy. Okay, check. And it's true. Those have been over the years. The challenge points where we've had different viewpoints or temptations. Luckily, the third one hasn't been a major one in our life. But I attribute that to two things. One again is the guidance and wisdom and strength that we get from faith and faith in God. It's not just the two of us, and certainly not any one of us by ourselves. It's us and the foundation of strength that we pull, from the Lord and His guidance and from Scripture, and it still lives every day. Even the Old Testament. I started reading in the middle of the pandemic, going through the Bible again, and started off with Exodus. And in some ways, you think that these stories are so ancient and so maybe theoretical, but then you read about even the Old Testament stories and the challenges of relationship and fidelity there. They are still such relevant living stories with lessons and guidance for us today. So absolutely, faith and the lessons, the very practical lessons that faith and Scripture can bring into your life is one. But the other point though is around intentionality. I think it's another term I heard in my early days when we were either engaged or thinking about being married, and it didn't really make sense. What do you mean by intentionality? Intentionality about being a parent, or intentionality about marriage? But it has struck me over the year that unless you are intentional about this, most people are not as intentional about investing in their relationship or their family or taking care of their children or spending and investing in carving out time with their children. They're not as invested in that or intentional about that as they are about what Netflix series they want to watch. They can see all three seasons at a certain point. They're very intentional about that as a goal, or very intentional about career path, about what sort of job they want and what sort of professional advancement. That people are very intentional about that, but they don't think about you have to be just as intentional, even more so, about family. Because they can take you in so many different ways. Unless you say, this is what I want my relationship to be, especially through challenges and through conflict, then it's very easy to gravitate to something else, or let that relationship gravitate in a way that it isn't what you want of it, or what you want it from your investments in it. So intentionality and faith to me are the two, I guess, keys that I try to keep in mind. With me and my family.
Okay, so I mean, raising kids. Sorry, I asked you a question about that one. I think I know kind of your answer, but it is different today raising kids. Social media, you mentioned, is a big disruptor in families, it seems, or many of them. What do you think is different about raising kids today, and what advice would you give younger couples, professional couples building careers?
This may be a little controversial, but okay. I would say that you can't have it all. And don't set yourself up for an unrealistic expectation. And I say it's controversial because, especially in a world where we want more professional women, and especially when it comes to single mothers like my mother, or so many of our professional women here in the Philippines, also single mothers. That's a difficult message to hear, but the message isn't don't pursue a career, but you have to be intentional about what are your priorities and where will you make compromises. And I say that both as a father, but I also say that from a mother's perspective, or a working spouse's perspective, or a stay-at-home spouse's perspective. And I know that with the needs and challenges and time requirements that I have in my day, I won't get to do everything I want to do with my kids. There's times where outside the pandemic world, where I'm traveling, or I'm gone for extended periods of time, or working at night, or working at night and sleeping on a weekend morning, or just a couple of examples. And I'm going to miss key things that I want to be part of. And for my wife, the same thing. She's chosen, we've chosen that she's the primary caregiver. And so there's times where she wants to advance, her career as a dietitian or as a wellness professional or as a trainer, and she's been able to do that very well, but not to the same degree. And there's times where she said, okay, I can't take this consult or this opportunity because I want to be here for this event with my kids, or home with the family, or I need to provide support in this way. So we have to make compromises, and we have to make choices literally every day. So when I say you can't have it all, it doesn't mean you can't pursue both, but I think you set yourself up for an unrealistic expectation, and eventually one that can't be met if you say, I'm going to be at every single event for my children. I'm going to be there every time they need me, not just when they ask for it, but even when they don't ask for it, but they still need you. And I'm going to also be there and ready to go with the ebbs and flows of the corporate world or a professional requirement. That's just impossible for a man or a woman. And so it worries me that, I think some of the messaging comes across the wrong way in our society, that you can have it all, because then we don't set up people to make the hard choices where, if I want to be at the graduation ceremony, next month, yes, that's my number one priority. I'm going to tell my boss that, hey, that time is reserved, can't go there. But that means that, this month where there's something else, maybe I can't make that one because I got to reprioritize some other time there. If we're not making those priorities and those decisions, then eventually one or the other is going to give. So I think that's my message, is that be prepared to understand your priorities, make those compromises. And I think also seek out companies that provide the flexibility for you to do so. I've been blessed with the organizations I've been part of, in my more recent past, both with AIG and now Reed Elsevier, fantastic organizations that, they're very driven organizations with a performance philosophy, but also a flexibility in terms of, when one of our employees, or when I need, when I say, look, this is an event that's non-negotiable, or it's really critical for me to be at for personal reasons, good, I can take that time to do that. But it doesn't mean, of course, you have unlimited time to do that. But it gives you the flexibility to make those choices and to be part of an organization that understands and respects those and gives me and our workforce the autonomy to make those decisions.
Okay, well done. That's a very, very good advice. Mark, getting over, say, to the general economy, the COVID thing, everybody talks about the new normal. What do you think are the main opportunities that are ahead for the global economy and even the regional economy? What do you see things that are going to be different and opportunities that will be apparent or more apparent?
Yeah, it's $1 million question amidst the ongoing pandemic, right? And I think there are some that are somewhat obvious, and then there are some that are some wild cards. The obvious ones, of course, are the virtual driven economy in terms of e-commerce. A lot of those aspects are here to stay. To the extent that we can still, post pandemic, there will be, I think, an uptick in terms of we will want to get out and interact again. We'll want to go to the malls. We'll want to experience life and interaction with people and the rest of the culture and communities. But I think that will also be balanced with when it comes to necessities. I need a new mouse for my computer, or I need a new dumbbell for my Lanai gym, or whatever it is. Oh, this has been so easy to get on Lazada or pay with Gcash or Paymaya or the ease of our e-commerce world. It's here to stay. I think we also see that in entertainment. While there's a movie theater experience, for example, that I think will always be there to some extent, the desire to watch a movie streamed from home on a 65-inch high-def television, that's going to be hard for movie theaters to compete with, except for that theater experience. But I think it'll be more like maybe going to a Broadway play where you want the experience of going out rather than you have to go to a movie theater because that's where a first-run movie is seen. Yeah. So I'm not the expert in the entertainment industry, but those are, from a consumer's perspective, those are the choices that I see. And to me, those are choices that I and my kids are making, and that's going to be here to stay in one dynamic or the other.
Yeah.
So e-commerce, I think, is the easy one, and anything that provides the ease of living and accessibility to products or media or entertainment is definitely going to be for long term. The ones that I think are going to be more interesting to watch and be part of when they get down to some of the more fundamentals of how we live and how we work. And certainly this is important to the service industry, with 1.3 million workers here, where even by PEZA requirements, you have to be in a physical facility, at least here in the Philippines. Well, we've proven in most cases that we can work from home in a very effective way. And indeed, this provides some critical capabilities for resiliency in the case of typhoons or volcanoes, not to mention pandemics, or God forbid, if there's a major earthquake in one of our metro areas. So there's a capability out there which is critical for us to understand and adopt in a greater extent. But will it be 30%? Will it be 50%? I don't think it should be 100%. There's too much value and need for unstructured learning and interaction for that to be the case for the long term. And so my prediction is that there'll be some companies that say, yeah, let's do this 100% because this seems like it's easy. But I think that's not going to reflect the realities of the human workplace and the sharing of knowledge, especially, again, the unstructured learning that comes from understanding a business or environment or an industry. But all these are going to have ripple effects, right? The commercial real estate industry, first and foremost, we've seen with in the Philippines here, the vacancy rates, plummet as POGOs have moved in, BPO has grown, and the economy's grown. Now we go the opposite direction. And what sort of ripple effects will that then have in terms of the real estate market, infrastructure, as well as all the providers and suppliers there? So those are just a couple implications, but I think a lot of it will circle around the future of work and the demographics of how do we come to the workplace? how do we interact with other people socially and professionally, and the ripple effects are going to be huge, both in terms of physical workspace, supply chains, technology, take up of technology, and future demands for technology.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Okay, I'm glad to hear. It's hard to really see what's going to happen, but well, Mark, maybe if I could ask you about Philippines. And you've spent a lot of your career now in the country, and certainly have made a big contribution. What do you think are some of the particular opportunities that Philippines has for the future? What do you think?
So the opportunity for the Philippines is still, luckily, it's still the same as it was 10 years ago and even 20 years ago. And that's the talent and the engagement here. Okay. Of course, in the heyday, in the hyper growth years of call centers and BPO 15 years ago, the Filipino worker sold himself or sold herself. It was the capability and really the engagement level and the willingness to learn and the level of dedication that the Filipino workforce brought to an organization that overcame and allowed them to overcome maybe the deficits in terms of technical skills or specific experience, because the learning curves were off the chart. The willingness to engage in companies and go through those learning experiences were off the chart. And so I'm so glad to see that hasn't changed at all. And if anything, maybe has only strengthened with the addition of, through the last decade of global exposure and interaction with global companies. There is this strong knock-on effect of creating a base of capability, which is far greater than what it was decades ago. The challenge 15 years ago was finding first-level supervisors and managers in an operations environment. Now we have a great base of that talent that exists, and that's moved up into a base of managerial talent, even senior level talent. There's still, I think, a much more narrow pyramid, but at least we can see, as more and more companies, localize the C-level leadership in the organization, and we see Filipinos taking those roles. That's just going to continue, forward. So those are some aspects of the growth and development of talent, both in terms of managerial, but also technical skill sets, development, technology, finance and accounting. 10 years ago, the conventional wisdom was you couldn't do finance and accounting from this environment; that had to be elsewhere. Now we've got tens of thousands of workers in the F&A space here with global business services. Delivering a very effective services from this environment. So I think that shows the prediction, but how quickly the Philippines stripped that prediction. So I'm still very bullish on talent and capability here, but the challenge of that is the ability of both companies as well as government and non-government institutions to continue to invest in the ways that we need to. I mentioned earlier that the future of work. Most other countries will adopt and create regulation which is friendly to working from home, because they know there's benefits for employees, and we know that the capability is absolutely there. So how quickly can our regulations in the regulatory environment recognize that and see that actually as a strength, that the more we can use work from home to mitigate some of the risks, which are significant from weather and natural catastrophes here, the more we can actually increase that capability, the stronger then our growth potential will be here. So there's some regulatory impacts, and then there's the ability for us to, as an industry, as well as government, to really focus in meaningful ways to invest in education that will continue the matching skill sets with the engagement level, which I don't see changing at all.
Okay, that's very good information. And so on the regulatory side, that's one area where naturally there's room for improvement, and I think the government is working that direction. Is there anything else that might be holding the country back? Because I know you've always been a big booster of the country's capabilities. What else might be continued to improve that you see?
Well, certainly infrastructure is the other major one. Whether it's just the real world logistical challenges of employee movement, from point A to point B. Certainly, Metro Manila, it's been a little refreshing, which maybe was the one silver lining of this COVID pandemic, is that the traffic has actually been reasonable for the last year, but only because we've been in the general community quarantine. But the fundamental issues are still there. Power generation and power sustainability, internet, and particularly mobile internet accessibility and quality. These are all airport and air transportation, all aspects of infrastructure and logistics, which have a very real impact in terms of both the ability to have the dynamic movement of talent in the country, so we can match skills and needs with developing opportunities, as well as the attractability or attractiveness of the environment, particularly for multinational or foreign investment into the country. Do we see this as sustainable? So these are questions, of course, been going on for decades, but so they're nothing new, and there's absolutely been progress made, but not the level of progress that matches the industry growth, either in tourism, BPO, or financial services, where we see double-digit growth in employment and in GDP contributions, but we don't see that yet in the infrastructure. So at some point, there's a tipping point where we've outstripped the ability of our infrastructure, as well as the technical skills in the marketplace to support that sort of growth. Will it stop? No, but I don't think so. But it's a question of, will it be double-digit? Will it be 7%? Will it be more moderate, 1 or 2%? But that's very, very meaningful in countries where we have the opportunity, and the raw material is here for this to be a double-digit growth economy in a number of different industries. But a lot of it will depend on infrastructure.
Correct. Yeah. So the opportunity is certainly in Philippines, and also the need, if I can say, if we have, 1 million, 2 million young people turning working age each year, and we got to get them jobs for them, or we're going to have trouble someday.
Absolutely. The demographics. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Mark, that has been a fantastic session. So now, Mark, how about you and your family? Are you going to continue working and driving yourself, or is you going to take it easy someday? I mean, what's your longer term plan, say, for 5-7 years from now?
Well, this is probably where the Marine in me is still alive and kicking. I don't see myself, quote unquote, taking it easy, anytime soon. And probably because I would be bored. Well, A, because I'd be bored, and B, because my golf game is definitely not good enough where I could entertain myself by playing golf if I was taking it easier. So, I would love to have at times more time for some personal pursuits, as well as with family. What keeps me, well, at least I hope, what keeps me young and energetic, is having a challenge, in my plate today, as well as ahead of me. That's part of the reason why, I moved to Reed Elsevier, Philippines.
Sure.
Is that, it is an entrepreneurial and commercial focused role, and something new and different. And so I could have easily have stayed with a company like AIG that I know and loved, and I would have enjoyed that. But I think I also had to look myself in the mirror and say, will you continue growing? Will you get stale, by staying in this same type of role or same organization? So part of it was asking the same question that you asked. you need to take yourself outside the comfort zone. And sometimes that does mean a different organization or even a different industry. So I think I probably answered that question for myself over the last year. Whether in 5 or 7 years, I don't think I'll slow down. At least I hope not. But yeah, I do hope that I'll continue to be faced with new challenges, and that will continue to take me outside my comfort zone, because that will hopefully keep me young, at least young at heart or young at mind, as I look in the future.
Very good. Thank you very much, Mark Lwin, for being with us on Going Deep with me, Richard Mills. Thank you, everyone, for being with us today for Going Deep with me, Richard Mills. And we had Mark Lwin for such an interesting background of this fellow. Half my NMREs grew up in the U.S., went to the military where he did interesting things, and then Philippines, where he's been such a performer and contributor for the country and for his own family. So really glad to have you for the session. We'll see you for the next one, Going Deep with me, Richard Mills. Thank you.